President Trump, who came out and said he's concerned about the consolidated market share of HBO and Netflix. You have Paramount, who this morning announced a hostile takeover play for Warner Brothers. So they're going to try and bypass the board and go straight to shareholders. I mean, this is like better than any Netflix Christmas movie. Like, I'm excited to see this drama play out.
Bring out the popcorn.
Bring out the popcorn, right? Good morning and welcome to Market Outsiders. If you thought that Black Friday shopping was competitive, well, we've got a story for you today. Netflix has agreed in principle to acquire Warner Brothers. They have won a massive bidding war and have committed $72 billion to acquiring the iconic Hollywood studio. We are going to break it all down today. What the business justification is for Netflix pulling the trigger on this move, if we think it's going to move forward or not from a regulatory perspective, if we think it's going to be a successful acquisition or not. This is the biggest news in business today, and we are here to break it all down. Before we get into it, if you have not rated, reviewed, or subscribed to Market Outsiders, please take a minute to go ahead and do that. We really, really appreciate it. Jenny Ray, before we dive into this blockbuster news, is there anything else that you'd like to start us off with this morning?
Hey, Naman, really excited to be here to break this down. Honestly, I have nothing else to add from the wildest weekend in Christmas land, but I do have to say that I think that small town America needs to know whether or not you have a Christmas tree this year and why or why not, because I think this is a fun fact that if everybody doesn't know it, they might not understand how you think. So can you give us a little bit of insight into your decision to Christmas tree or not to Christmas tree?
Well, so far we have no Christmas tree up because this year it would require me to move some furniture around. And so the answer from me has been, let's skip the Christmas tree. I don't want to deal with moving the furniture. I don't want to deal with the mess. It's going to be gone in 3 weeks anyways. So I think my wife is having second thoughts about that after initially agreeing with my logic. So honestly, like, I could get home today and there could be a Christmas tree up in our living room.
All right, so Christmas Tree Gate 2025 is not over yet, is what we're saying.
It's not over.
Okay.
It's probably not going to be over until there's a tree up, to be honest with you.
Like you might just want to give up early because knowing that kind of conversation would reduce the utilitarian benefit of not having your Christmas tree. I think I told you that we're in November 1st camp now, and I think we're going to stay squarely there. What I think remains to be seen in our household is whether or not the Christmas tree stays up until Valentine's Day like it normally does. When I was growing up, we had a Christmas tree collection at the curb. I think it was like the first and second week of January, and you could either be on the early bus or the late bus, but those were the only two buses. And honestly, I don't think my family could have figured out what to do with a Christmas tree if we didn't get it out to the curb for those 2 weeks. But living on a farm now, there are lots of options for what you can do with a Christmas tree. And so anyhow, we'll keep really close tabs on that. But Naman, I think at this point, if the people are ready, we can dive over to the real news.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So on Friday, Netflix announced an acquisition agreement with Warner Brothers, $72 billion to acquire the film studio. A little bit of context, just so everybody's on the same page here. Right now, the company is Warner Brothers Discovery. And so what's going to happen before this deal closes is that Warner Brothers and Discovery are going to split, and Netflix is going to acquire Warner Brothers, which is the film and production studio that holds a lot of the rights to the iconic movies, right? Shawshank Redemption, and TV shows like Big Bang Theory that a lot of us know and love. And so this, to me, Jenny Ray, like before we even say anything else, seems like a fundamental rethinking of Netflix's business model. So look, Netflix is much smarter about their business and about the media space than I am. But this was a little bit of a surprise to me that a disciplined operator like Netflix entered into this bidding war against Paramount, against Skydance, against others, and came out the winner. And so before we get into the mechanics of the deal, like, did you have an initial reaction to this? And if so, what was it?
So my initial reaction was, I can imagine the frenzy of what would happen inside this deal. And I would imagine that this was not a disciplined decision. This was hey, we think we're going to be around for a long time. Let's throw the model out the window and let's see what it takes to win this particular war. And I actually heard about the news in a way that might surprise you. And I know you're pulling up the article. Can I actually just screen take over real quick beforehand and share with everybody how I heard that the news broke? Because I thought this was kind of fun. So this was what I saw, right when the news broke. I follow Mark Randolph, who is the Netflix co-founder. I think that his insights on business are fantastic, but I actually started following him because he had a hard and fast family rule that I thought was really powerful. And I think it was every Tuesday he would leave the office, turn off his phone at 5 o'clock, and it didn't matter whether they were raising money or going public or what was happening. And he would go on a date with his wife. And he just said, like, his one commitment was not to becoming a billionaire in Silicon Valley. It was to becoming a family man who was married to the same person for his whole entire duration on this earth. And I just loved the principle of the differences between what I saw and the way that he was operating his life. So anyhow, I followed him ever since then, and I really loved what he said here. He said, 29 years ago, I debated whether I could afford to spend $50K on the domain name I really wanted for Netflix. And I actually remember in the like mid 2000s going through a domain name decision like this one with one of my startups, Energy X, and we ended up spending $1,000 on a domain name, which ultimately we ended up flipping for five a couple of years later. But it was that kind of same decision that felt like the name was really important. And I think Mark came to the conclusion the same way that I did, that like you could build a brand on a name rather than using the name to build the brand. But right, he kind of was just reflecting on the fact that $50,000 29 years ago at the origin of Netflix was just crazy money. And now these numbers that we're talking about, right? And we'll actually go through the numbers. He has 70 and 82 billion both in this actual post. But I was kind of like, whoa. And here's what he said, right? And I thought this was good context to kick off with. HBO were the proprietary content pioneers. So what did that mean? It made me think back on it. A lot of the studios were not doing movies on TV. They were restreaming movies on TV on advertising channels with the actual advertisers paying for those fees. But HBO is actually doing everything. They were producing, they were building it, and HBO was like the big man on campus. So thinking about actually the evolution of HBO to today, and then whether or not Netflix needs them, which I think is really the crux of this, right? Is Netflix, did Netflix need this, and how are they going to pay it back? It has to be through higher revenues on a per customer basis, because Netflix has very little additional penetration options at this point. A couple of years ago, when they locked down password sharing, they exploded some of their numbers. They have a global opportunity to continue to grow penetration, but it's not as fast as potential price changes. Basically, are you willing to bundle what you may have been paying for separately into Netflix, and will that pay it back? I think that's kind of the fundamental question here. And to me, it seemed like they maybe couldn't come up with a number, so they just picked a number that they thought would win. So I'm really, I've seen this happen. I've been in the boardrooms where we worked for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on how long the bid cycle was, and we came up with really principled decision making. And the number that came out on the news cycle on the other side was not the same, because ultimately, the execs were just like, have to have it, can't let somebody else get it. And it kind of became like a middle school bidding war instead of this really advanced principled bidding war. So I think you probably have two of those elements in here, and I think it'd be interesting to look at what you think might be the underpinnings and where you
Yeah.
think they came out.
Yeah. Well, I think this is like an interesting insight into where Netflix leadership sees its own business. So, like, and all of this comes down to how you define the streaming landscape. So, if you define the streaming landscape as your kind of your what we'll call your traditional streamers, so your Netflix, your Hulu's, your Disney Pluses, your HBO Maxes, etc., then Netflix is the clear market leader, and so like they are the king of the castle. No one is within touching distance of them in terms of revenue, market share, etc. But I think what's happening here is that Netflix is taking a broader view of the market, and they are seeing that their like viewing time relative to competitors like YouTube is dropping. So they see a business problem where everybody else sees like a company that's kind of taking a whipped cream slide down into peaches and strawberries, right? Like I think this gives you interesting insight into kind of where, like, who they see as their competitive set and what they actually see as the threats on the horizon. And I think that this deal was made with an eye towards YouTube. And the metric that I would be paying attention to if I was at Netflix is like not like necessarily market share in terms of revenue, but market share in terms of like streaming minutes. And so if you look at that metric, you will find that more and more content is consumed on YouTube versus Netflix. And really Netflix is in a is in a battle for our time, and every minute that you decide to spend anywhere else is a minute that they don't get from you. And so how do you reverse that? I think one of the ways that you
And
do
do
it
you
is you
have to? I think we should have
and
that
do you have to?
conversation. Yeah,
Yeah.
because fundamentally, Netflix capped its revenues, at least up until now, on a per user basis, and it was kind of like the value proposition was you don't have to spend more to, identify this watch time. So thinking about the way that they're actually making money off of their users
I
is
think you
fundamentally
have
different.
to.
YouTube is uncapped, right?
Yeah.
If you watch X as much on YouTube, YouTube makes 10x on you.
Well,
And that's important for
that's
YouTube's.
important. When Netflix decided to introduce an ad-supported tier, they boxed themselves into having to care about this.
Mhm,
So yes, you do have to care about watch time for really two reasons. Number one is the more that someone on an ad-supported tier watches, the more incremental revenue you unlock.
100%.
Number two is there's a direct correlation between watch time and churn. And so the more that you can have someone make Netflix like an integral part of their entertainment life, the less likely they are to unsubscribe. And so I think those are the two ways that the watch time correlates to incremental revenue. And so I think they have to care about it. I think that's the metric that's driving the transaction. Now, I think we could argue till we're blue in the face about whether this is going to give them what they're looking for. But from my perspective, that's kind of the underlying business case, is that this is going to add to our content library. It's going to give us, additional distribution. I mean, Netflix can go direct to theaters. Right now they don't. Warner Brothers kind of has that system and that pipeline set up. And then it's also going to give us access to some of the auxiliary units at Warner Brothers, like gaming, right? Which Netflix is really getting into to unlock incremental revenue. So I think that's the business justification for the deal. And I wanted to see if there's anything else that you saw here in terms of why Netflix might be doing this.
Well, I think fundamentally that's part of the question. It's also possible that Warner Brothers has different relationships with different pieces of the ecosystem that Netflix doesn't right now. Netflix has a pretty simple operating model for the size of company that it is, right? It has a studio, and then it has the tech side with user acquisition. But like you mentioned, Warner Brothers' complexity of the business can both be a benefit and also it can weigh down a lot of the decision-making process for Netflix. One of the things I refer back to here are some of the cases that we've done with universities where we've had students think about how would Netflix grow. A lot of people love to admire companies once they've gotten to where they are, but they don't think like the strategists have to inside the company for where they need to go tomorrow. And gaming has actually been one of those areas for Netflix. But just to go back to what you're talking about, Naman, I do think that watch time is pretty critical for Netflix. But interestingly, I would imagine that there's probably some other metric that matters. For me, when I think about the more valuable platforms, to me, it's not necessarily aggregated watch time, but it's frequency of log. It's like how often I go to that platform to find something. And so you could imagine that if Netflix diversifies what you go to Netflix for, my frequency of logging onto it would improve, even if my watch time shifts from something that I used to watch to something that I'm watching.
Totally.
But that to me, when I think about the streaming platform portfolio that our family utilizes, the ones at greatest risk are not necessarily the ones that we don't watch for volume of hours, but the ones that we least likely to kind of log on to on a frequent basis.
Interesting. I would be interested to see the data on that. And there could be a bifurcation, right? Where for the ad supported tier, your goal is to maximize watch time. And for the non ad supported tier, it's watch time, but it's also like how frequently someone coming back to the platform. Like, can we make this a habitual part of their day?
And I think we're actually fundamentally asking a question that neither one of us may right now know the answer to, but that would be one of the first questions I would go look at, or I would put this in my framework if I was looking at it. It would be, what is the size of each relative tier in terms of revenue for Netflix, and what is the growth rate? My expectation is that they may be conflating the growth rate in that ad-supported tier with their current tier that they have right now in terms of revenue, and thinking about it in a way that is higher growth but likely lower revenue, which is kind of a non-core piece of their business. Now, like you mentioned earlier, maybe they know something that we don't know. Maybe they think that the ad-supported tier is the future of Netflix. And Facebook made a strategic decision pretty early on when they allowed people to opt out of Facebook ads, and they realized that that was a super terrible idea, and they made it so that it was impossible to do that, right? So now on Facebook and Instagram, like, you are not allowed to pay for a tier where you are not delivered ads. And it is possible, and that would be, to me, one of the only reasons I could see this business justification coming to fruition would be if Netflix was thinking about removing entirely their clear non-ad tier. So maybe you don't get ads in the middle of every episode, but you definitely, before you watch your next episode of The Gilmore Girls, which I know you've been binge watching them on, right? At the beginning and the end of every episode, you're going to be delivered an ad. So I could imagine that, but only if they force the majority right now, which I would suspect is of their population, onto that tier in order to uncap some of that revenue from that tier.
Here's the other alternative. It's that we're moving back to an era of bundling. And so, you've got Warner Brothers content library, you've got Netflix content library, you've got HBO Max or whatever the heck they're calling it these days, right? Like you've got this reconsolidation happening in the media landscape. And so what you're saying is valid, but the other option is that this like combined offering is now $50 or $60 a month, and we're moving back to like cable prices.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's going to end up being the culmination of all of this. You're not going to hear about it for the next 18 months because Netflix needs to get regulatory approval. And so usually, and I'm not an antitrust lawyer, but my understanding is that when a deal will hand a player 30% market share, which this would, then it comes under really intense scrutiny from the Department of Justice. So HBO Max plus Netflix would be 30% share of the streaming market. Again, depending on how you define that market, that's where economic consultants come into play. And so there's going to be a lot of regulatory scrutiny on this deal. And one of the effects that regulators look at is this deal going to lead to consumer harm? And one of the ways that they define consumer harm is, well, prices going up. So I don't think you're going to hear about that in the short term, but I think eventually the only other alternative is that they move back to some kind of super bundle where now instead of me paying $25 a month for the premium non-ad tier, it's $65 a month. And Netflix is already trying to get ahead of this messaging. I'm a Netflix subscriber. I literally got an email the day the deal was announced telling me that prices were not changing. And so like they wanted to own the narrative around this because I think everyone can see the writing on the wall. But that to me is the only other business justification for this, is that you are going to introduce some kind of like super premium bundle.
Exactly.
If you run a small or medium-sized business, you know how fast cyber risks are evolving. That's why I use Nord products myself. And for businesses, there's Nord Stellar. It's a threat exposure management platform that helps you spot cyber threats before they become full-blown incidents. Nord Stellar combines data breach and dark web monitoring, attack surface management, and cyber squatting protection, all in one platform. It gives you real-time visibility into leaked credentials, exposed assets, and impersonation attempts so you can act before attackers do. Think of it as seeing what hackers see and fixing it first. Right now, Nord Stellar has an exclusive Black Friday offer. Unlock 20% off with code BLACKFRIDAY20. But only until December 10th, 2025. Visit nordstellar.com/simplified to secure your business today.
Here's the thing. Netflix really hasn't had a lot of different bundling where their option set of what you can see is different. So are you suggesting that in the future I can pay more to see more? Or are you suggesting that Netflix would raise the floor of every price tier in order to just have this bundled access? Which way do you think they would be thinking about it right now?
The latter. I think it would just be all or nothing and raise the floor is the way that I'd be thinking about this. I think there's too much complexity, too much confusion for the consumer. If you're going to allow me to pick and choose what I see, it's just, this is what we have available. Pick kind of entry-level option with ads, pick the mid-tier option that gives you like standard definition with no ads, or pick the premium option that gives you high definition with no ads. But no matter which tier you pick, you're going to get access to our entire content. Like that's the way I think they're thinking about it.
It's interesting because if you were thinking about the economic consulting angle, and we work with a lot of the economic consulting firms, it is possible that it was a happy accident. I doubt that they were this genius strategic, although it's absolutely possible that introducing the ad-supported tier wasn't only a Netflix business justification, but a defense for these kinds of deals. Because if you can argue that YouTube is in your competitive set, you fundamentally change the definition of the entire market.
Yes.
Because if the market is just how much people pay for streaming on aggregate, in a given year, that's a very different market size than how much
They
people are
watch.
paid or watched, or what the total revenue, including ads, is for a market. And I would imagine that the YouTube ad spend matches or somehow even potentially eclipses some of these other numbers.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's absolutely possible that that would be something kind of fascinating to look at inside there. What you said also brought up another question for me, Naman, when I'm thinking about building or doing this deal. If it fundamentally changes the competitive set. So I just wanted to ask you a personal question. Do you subscribe? What's in your portfolio? Who do you subscribe to? Because to me, the benefit of cable bundling is that there are some kind of anchor pieces that are essential that you have to pay bundling for. And so to me, like, I don't actually pay more on purpose for Netflix plus Warner Brothers because I don't actually subscribe to any of the other pieces of that content library. And so then that makes, I think about it and I'm kind of like, well, maybe they can just make me pay more and I'm just willing to. And that is an absolute possibility, by the way, right? Like, you're just not going to cancel Netflix. You're not going to cord cut Netflix. And so they have price elasticity that you didn't imagine. And it's nice to have the justification for content for that, but actually they probably didn't need it at the beginning or the end. They could have just raised my price to $50 and I still probably wouldn't have canceled it. But I think about the competitive set here. So yeah, just curious, between, Apple TV and Disney Plus and some of these other kind of streaming platforms, what's in your portfolio? What's in your
Yeah.
wallet? And how does this represent a share shift?
So my portfolio is bloated because I get like complimentary access to a lot of streamers. So I get complimentary access to Apple TV through my credit card. I get complimentary access to HBO Max through my internet provider. And so the only streamers I pay for are Netflix certain months of the year. Like December, we usually pay because we're home more often, right? And so there's just more opportunities for us to chill and watch Netflix. So that
It's Hallmark Christmas movies. Tell me the truth.
exactly. Now it's Netflix Christmas movies, not even Hallmark. So
I know.
yeah,
They're to be fair, they're still a Hallmark style, but
they
you're
are.
exactly
They
right.
are. And
Semantics are
there's
important here, though.
yep, exactly.
This is why you're getting a Christmas tree, actually.
There you go. By the way, I'm not a Grinch. I love Christmas. So I just don't need I don't need a tree to enjoy it. It is the
You're the
point.
man who I lost a dollar bet on because I bet that you were going to wear the same pants for the fourth day in a row, and you changed your pants only on day 4. So to be fair, this is the same guy that we're talking about, guys.
Yeah. And so we pay for Netflix certain months of the year. And then we always find a Groupon for Peacock. So like we end up paying like $20 a year for the premium Peacock, right? So maybe I shouldn't have said that on this podcast because that's probably going to disappear now. But because we can get
Or maybe
Peacock
you
at
can link
that,
to the next Groupon.
because we can get Peacock for that price, like we're like, why not? And then the same is true of Hulu as well. Like it's dirt cheap. It ends up being like $2 a month for us. And so like, but if I had to pay full price for Peacock or Hulu, I'd cancel it tomorrow. And so, and like I
You're
wouldn't
more
pay for,
disciplined than the average probably consumer, but still, like, to
yeah,
even subscribe to it in the first place, you had to be
yeah,
induced, is what we're
yeah.
saying here.
And for me, like it was just price was the inducement. I don't care what the content library is, right? It's like, oh, if you've got one show that we like to watch, cool, $2 a month seems to be worth it. But much more than that, I don't need
Just
to
find
watch the
something
show.
else to watch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I think, again, I think Netflix probably has way deeper data, better focus groups, more customer feedback. They know when they add and subtract something, if that has any direct relationship to subscriber numbers. But I'm just gonna put a stake out there. Like, I think this is a terrible idea unless Netflix moves to ad supported entirely across the board. And I think that that's the only way that I can see them justifying this, because I think that at a certain price point, you become entirely, if you believe that you're inelastic, you don't do the deal because you just do it now. You do it now as it is. If you believe that this portfolio makes you a little bit more inelastic, that I just don't see that price change paying this back. I think the only way that you make the money that you need to pay back a deal like this is through an ad-supported tier. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm skeptical. This seems like a fundamental kind of rethinking of their business model. If you look at the Netflix's 30-year history, they've always chosen to build versus buy. So like 15 years ago when they were getting into original content, like it would have been really easy for them to say, we're going to go acquire like a content house. We're going to go acquire an HBO and become the premium content provider. They did it themselves. And so now that they're in this position, I'm like, it's probably still cheaper for you to continue to like build your own content. Like even if you're going to spend $20 billion a year on content and like dwarf every other streaming provider on the market, like this is still 4 years of like crazy original like content production just in the value of this deal. Like, and are you going to extract that value back? Like my default answer is always no. Right. And so like, you're taking on a complex business. You are parting with mostly cash. We haven't even talked about the deal mechanics, Jenny, right? Like this
Yeah,
is
I
a
know.
mostly cash transaction. And
Insane.
Netflix's free cash flow is impressive, but this is still a huge amount of money for them. 70 to 80 billion dollars, depending on who you believe in terms of what the deal value is. And then you've got the regulatory risk as well. You know, you have President Trump who came out and said he's concerned about the consolidated market share of HBO and Netflix. You have Paramount who this morning announced a hostile takeover play for Warner Brothers. So they're going to try and bypass the board and go straight to shareholders. This is like better than any Netflix Christmas movie. Like I'm excited to see this drama play out.
Bring out the popcorn.
Bring out the popcorn, right? And an interesting provision that I read about this weekend that Netflix agreed to close the deal is that if for whatever reason the deal gets scuttled, Netflix owes Warner Brothers a breakup fee of 9% of the total value of the deal. So that is like 3 times higher than what a traditional breakup fee is. And so it's an almost all cash deal. They're going to pay 9% of the value to Warner Brothers if for whatever reason the deal doesn't go through. I can see why Warner Brothers accepted this offer, but there's just a lot of risks here that Netflix is taking on when I feel like they don't necessarily need to.
So I'd love to dive into the article just for 2 minutes so that people have a few of the fun facts. But I just want to say one other thing. We've talked like this is a totally rational deal, right? But I said at the beginning that I've seen a lot of deals done with middle school mechanics. And I think that it's important to understand how somebody might have justified this deal if it wasn't justified on paper. Naman, who else, like standalone is a competitor, but not really, as we've talked about. Who else were they concerned about in this deal-making process? You know, so because sometimes you buy something and it's almost, by the way, never the right reason to buy it, but sometimes you buy something because it's a toy that you just don't want somebody else to have. And so, you know, is there a play there that you think that would be important for Netflix? And then as we close, let's just run through a couple of the deal mechanics.
Yeah. Well, like I just mentioned, Paramount's been interested in Warner Brothers for a long time. But if I'm Netflix, like, let's just be real, like Paramount isn't keeping me up at night.
Nope.
Like I don't care. Right. Like, and so I think really the only 2 competitors I care about if I'm Netflix, number 1, Disney, right? And then number 2, YouTube. In some order. That's it.
100%. Okay, great. Just wanted to get that clearly out there. And so we haven't talked about whether Disney was interested, whether Disney was a part of this conversation, but I can imagine a play where Disney is like, hey, we're going to buy them. And Netflix is like, no, you're not. Right. So, and like literally they probably had people working on the deal for weeks and they tried to come up with some justification for the numbers. But sometimes I just want y'all to know it does not fundamentally come down to a rational decision. So let's work through the deal mechanics before we close, because it is, we've talked now about some of the key pieces that you'd want to know if you were trying to understand this deal, and just fundamentally if you're trying to understand deal-making landscapes inside these corporate transactions, private equity, et cetera. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about just a couple of the pieces of the deal mechanics that we want to leave people with.
So we've already talked about how the deal is to acquire Warner Brothers. So that's the film studio, the TV studio, HBO Max, and HBO. So and there's gaming involved as well, but those are the core tenets of Warner Brothers. Here's what I want to jump to, because there's a lot of kind of narrative in here, kind of from the co-CEOs of Netflix. This, I think, clears up quite a bit of confusion that we had. So the total enterprise value of the deal is $82 billion. So that's the cash and stock transaction value, but the equity value is $72 billion. That's why we've been seeing kind of 2 different numbers floating around. Even in Mark Randolph's post that you shared earlier, he had like 2 different numbers there. So this explains which is which.
He might have figured out those numbers, and that if he's making a comment about 50,000 being a lot of money, that maybe like a $12 billion differential, somebody would have noticed.
It's a rounding error.
It's a rounding error.
And so this makes a little bit more sense. One thing I noticed on Friday, so both of us were traveling for work last week, but once I got a look at this news, one of my first instincts was to go and see how investors were reacting. And Netflix's stock was down on Friday on this news. I think investors share some of the skepticism that we share. And look, it's a huge outlay. I'd want to go look at Netflix's free cash flow. I'd want to go look at their cash on hand. Right. Like they can afford it, but even for Netflix, like this is a significant transaction. that really limits your option set moving forward for other things that you can invest in.
Well, maybe it's like a Christmas decision after all, where, if you have the money, you spend the money, whether it's good to spend it or not. And when you think about everything else that Netflix could buy, there aren't a lot of other things that are necessarily on the table that would be as valuable or as critical like this. So there is some possibility that they're thinking about just ways to add enterprise value because of that conversation that must have been going on for quite a long time. If you're interested in this kind of deal making, it's really valuable to understand how an acquirer breaks down the framework and how they look at the market and the company in the ways that we talked about today. But the most fundamental thing that you need to understand is how they're going to transact increased profit off of a deal, whether that's exactly how they think about it, whether they're disciplined about actually achieving that or not, are two very different pieces of the conversation, but they are fundamentally a piece of the advisory process, and really, really, really insightful if you're trying to understand deals like this. So this is a great one to dig into because you have a lot of data available. You have a lot of data on the companies, a lot of analyst information available. It's also particularly interesting from a consumer side. So if you're looking for some homework this week to get smart about the industry, but also to get smart about the way that these kind of deals are done, this is a great case example to dive into. As Iman mentioned earlier, if you haven't already rated, subscribed, or jumped on to the bandwagon and sent us an email for a future episode that you'd like to hear at Market Outsiders, we'd love to hear from you. Our community means a lot to us. We're really grateful for all that y'all have helped us build this year, and we're looking forward to a great 2026. So stick along for the ride. We'll see you later this week. Look forward to being back with you again. Have a great week.